So today we're going to look at preparing for interviews. This is part of step 3 of the Pathways programme. Like everything else that we cover in these sessions, preparation is key. Without preparation, you're bound to do a really bad interview. So it's like preparing your CV. It's like preparing your LinkedIn profile, writing an application form, going for an interview. You need to do your preparation. So if you get an interview, it's a really, really good sign. They obviously like your application, they like your CV, but you need to do a lot of preparation before you actually sit down in front of the person. So how to prepare? Number 1, be very, very clear about the skills that you have to offer potential employers. Number 2, be able to sell yourself confidently and effectively. So again, that probably involves some practice beforehand. Do your research on the company. So use websites, LinkedIn, any contacts you may have to find out as much as possible about the company. And then you read the job description thoroughly. Identify the specific skills which are required and match them with your own. So what kind of interviews may you be invited to? In the old days, it used to be you'd be sitting in an office, across the table from somebody, and they would go through your CV. Today, there are so many different types of interviews, and you need to be aware of the types of interviews out there, and you need to be prepared for them. So you could have everything from phone interviews, video interviews, lunch or dinner interviews, strengths-based interviews, group interviews, competency-based interviews, panel interviews. They all have the same purpose, to find out as much as possible about you, but they all have different formats. So you need to be clear about what kind of interview you've been invited to, and you need to prepare accordingly. Just to kind of give a quick update, I suppose at the moment with coronavirus, many employers will be holding interviews by phone or by video. So you need to make sure that your telephone and video interview skills are up to scratch. Here are a couple of links that you might find useful. I'll be talking briefly in this session about video interviews, but again, this is kind of where we're at the moment. So if you do have an interview coming up in the near future, it may be by video, it may be by Skype, or it may be by phone, and there are certain ways you can prepare for them. And here are a couple of links to check out. Okay, so quick question, first impressions. Doesn't take long, does it, to make a first impression about somebody? 7 to 17 seconds when you first meet somebody. That's how long it takes to form a first impression. So you need to make sure when you're walking into the interview that your first impression is a good, strong, confident impression. So 7 to 17 seconds of meeting somebody, they're forming an impression about you already. So in a survey of 2,000 managers, 33% claim to know whether or not they would hire someone within 90 seconds. If your interview is lasting, say, for half an hour, and they formed their impression or their idea of whether they would hire you within the first 90 seconds, that's probably the question, tell me about yourself. It's your eye contact, it's your body language, it's how you shake hands. So again, you need to be aware of the kind of first impression that you make. And the most common verbal mistake or non-verbal mistake that interview candidates make is failure to make eye contact. So again, you don't want to be staring at them, but you do need to look at the person that you're talking to. If you have more than one person, you could have 2, 3, even more people. You need to try and include everybody in your answer. So first impressions are so important. So be aware of how you come across. And again, if you need to do a practice interview at any stage, or you'd like to get some feedback, we'd be happy to help you. So over the next few minutes, we're going to be looking at competency-based interviews, strengths-based interviews, and video interviews. Competency-based interviews are still the most important type of interviews, and they are very popular with larger employers and especially with graduate recruiters. So the probability is you are going to be having a competency-based interview at some stage. The idea behind competency interviews is that past behaviour can be an indicator of future performance. And you'll see how that works out now in a couple of minutes. Employers like them because they're easy to compare and score candidates against others. They'll have a sheet and your answers will be scored against predetermined criteria. And the employer will have a structured list of questions, each of which is focused on a specific skill needed for that particular job. So it basically means everybody will be asked the same questions and you'll be scored against other candidates. And usually whoever gets the highest score is the most successful. So what are the key competencies regularly looked for by employers? So even if you look at this kind of image here, you have your technical skills. So that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be computing skills. It could be report writing skills. It could be research methods. It could be customer service skills, things like that. So they're the kind of skills that are needed for the job. Then you've got your business skills, your business acumen. You may need digital skills, I suppose, in the world that we're living at the moment. The more digital skills you have, the better. Obviously, you need to have your people skills. So as well as the kind of skills required for the job, the business skills and the business awareness, all employers are looking for things like adaptability, commercial awareness, communication skills, conflict resolution, flexibility, problem solving, creativity, teamwork. So again, be prepared to be asked about these skills and make sure you have answers that can show that you've demonstrated these skills. So how will you know that you're being asked a competency-based question? Okay, there's a very, very easy to spot. You will be asked things like, tell me about a time when you had to do this or that. Can you describe where you had to do something? And can you give me an example of? Okay. If you've been asked these questions, you know you're in a competency interview. The thing about a competency interview is it's very hard to think on the hoof. If you're sitting at an interview and you're asked these questions, can you give me an example of when you demonstrated good communication skills or when you had to make a difficult decision? It's very hard to think on the spot. So you really, really need to do your research. So if you know that you're going to be invited to a competency interview, you need to have your examples and your stories ready long before the interview. So what will they be looking for? Okay, they will usually ask you to describe a specific time when you displayed a certain skill or a certain situation you found yourself in. What did you do? Okay, for example, they may ask you, when have you used your communication skills to influence other people's behaviour? Very common one is to ask you about a time or to give an example of a situation when you worked in a team to achieve a goal. What was your contribution? What would you do differently in the future? So again, you can see that you need to have examples ready. And there's a very specific structure that you would usually use when you're answering a competency-based question. And if you use this structure, you'll be able to include all the relevant points and facts, and hopefully it kind of gives the interviewer something to score you against as well. So we would always recommend that you use the STAR method to structure your answers. Again, you may need to write down your answers first of all and do several drafts before you feel confident in actually saying or giving the answer. So using the STAR method, what is it? So the S and the T, they stand for the situation or the task. So this is kind of the opening or the introduction to your answer. Here is kind of where you describe the event. Numbers work well here. For example, instead of stating that you worked in a busy office or a reception switchboard, you could say that you were transferring over 50 calls an hour. So for the situation or task, you're basically setting the scene. You're giving the introduction to the story. The A is for action. So this is what you did, and this is the body of the story. So this is the really important part of the answer. So this is where you talk about the actions you took, how you behaved during the situation. You need to give lots of detail. The one thing that we always find in the career service when students are giving an answer to a competency-based question is, especially in things like teamwork, they'll say, or they'll use the word we all the time. The interviewer wants to know about you, so you have to be very clear when you're answering a competency-based question that you use I. Even if you're talking about a group project, they want to know what it was that you did. What did you achieve? What action did you take? So your answers really have to be I. So be very, very aware that you're not slipping into, we did this, we achieved that, we organised. This section is all about you, so you need to be answering I. Well, final section is the R, that's the results. So this is where you kind of state the outcome of the situation. So you could highlight what you learned, or what you learned from the situation, or maybe what you would do differently. So absolutely, if you have a competency-based interview, you need to become familiar with the STAR-based answer. Just one thing to be aware of, lots of people, when they're answering using the STAR method, they tend to spend way too much time on the S and the T, the situation or the task. That needs to be quite brief. You need to be very specific about what the situation was. But again, the main body of your answer needs to be in the action stage. Another interview that's becoming more and more popular for graduates, and it's something that you may be finding yourself having to attend in the future. They're not as common as competency-based interviews, but they are becoming more popular. And if you're not prepared for a strengths-based interview, you probably end up thinking, why are they asking me these kind of questions? So what you need to do for strengths-based interviews, you need to think about what it is that you enjoy doing. I think Anne talked about strengths earlier in step 1, so you should be familiar with this concept already. So a competency interview is about what you can do. A strengths-based interview is what you enjoy doing and when you're at your best. Okay, so it's really important to think about the activities that give you energy, the activities that you enjoy, also maybe the activities that you don't enjoy. But if you're going to an interview and you're going to be asked some strengths-based questions, you need to practice talking about them. And it's not something we're very good at doing usually. Okay, so practicing talking about your strengths or thinking about them initially. What are you good at doing and what activities give you energy and why? So again, you need to have examples, but a strengths-based interview is very much about the activities that you enjoy. So what are interviewers looking for in a strengths-based interview? I suppose, again, it's one thing being able to do something. We can all do certain tasks, but if you don't enjoy them, you're not going to be very productive. Work is going to be a drag for you. So a lot of employers, the reason they're using strengths-based interviews is they not only want to find people who can do the job, but they want to find people who will actually really enjoy the role as well. So they're looking for evidence that you, the candidate, will have the strengths needed for the role being interviewed for. So in these kind of interviews, they're a little bit different in that interviewers are trained to gain insight and to take notice of how each candidate answers. If you think about when you're talking about something that you really, really enjoy doing, your body language will change, your postures will change. So these interviewers are trained to kind of spot where the energy is coming from as well. So it's a really kind of an interesting way to interview people, and it's hard to pretend to be enthusiastic about something that you're not enthusiastic. So how do you prepare for a strengths-based interview? Some people will say that you cannot prepare for a strengths-based interview, but we think you can. Number one, you have to be yourself. There's no point pretend to be somebody that you're not, so be yourself. Answer the questions honestly. There are no right or wrong answers. If you don't have a particular strength in an area that you're going to be, working in 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's not going to be very, very enjoyable for you. So there are no right or wrong answers for these questions. You need to be yourself. But if you are kind of giving answers about things that you enjoy doing and that you're good at, your enthusiasm will come through straight away anyway. So that's mainly how you prepare for a strengths-based interview, to think about things that you really, really enjoy doing. If you find that you're not enjoying the questions or the kind of strengths that they're looking for in a strengths-based interview, if you don't feel that you have them, it's probably not the job for you anyway. So what kind of questions may you be asked at a strengths-based interview? Very simple. What are you good at? We ask this a lot in some of our interview workshops, and it's amazing the amount of students who'll turn around and say, I don't know, nobody's ever asked me that before, I have no idea. If you're at a strengths-based interview, you will be expected to speak about the kind of things that you're good at. Another one that's very common is, when did you achieve something that you were really proud of? It doesn't have to be a major achievement. It's something that's very personal to you. So even to have a think about these kind of questions, you know, when did you do something that you were proud of? This is an interesting one. What things are always left on your to-do list and not finished? That's usually a sign of something that you don't enjoy doing. So if this is kind of a core role of the job, but you don't enjoy doing it, again, are your strengths being matched to this job? So if there's something that you don't enjoy doing, that's usually a sign of a weakness. Do you think this role will play to your strengths? So again, you need to be clear about what your strengths are. Are you a starter or a finisher? That's another kind of an interesting one, isn't it? Some people are great at starting projects, and then they kind of dwindle off a bit. Some people are great at finishing projects, and you need both types of people. But I suppose, just to be clear, when you're answering this question, just think about what it is. Are you a starter or a finisher? Do you get enthusiastic and you get lots of energy when you think about starting a project, or do you get more energy when you're finishing a project? Another question, what do you do in your spare time? That just might be finding out, are you active? Do you like solitary activities? Do you like lots of team activities? Do you like being with lots of people? Do you like quiet activities? So what do you like to do when you're not being really, really busy? And what kind of activities give you an energy buzz? So again, these questions aren't necessarily related to the job, but they are about finding out where your energy comes from. Video interviews are becoming very, very common, especially at the moment with coronavirus. So the video interview I'm talking to you about now, it's not a two-way interview like a telephone call would be, or a Skype interview would be, or a Microsoft Teams interview. These type of interviews are called one-way, and they're used by an awful lot of graduate recruiters. So these are how would I describe it now? Okay, it's a one-way interview where you will receive an email from an employer inviting you to an interview. The email will contain a link. You'll usually have about 72 hours to complete the interview. So again, you need to do your preparation beforehand, but it's basically you speaking in to a screen. There's nobody at the other side of the screen. Your answers will be recorded, and then you'll press submit, and the interviewers will have a look at them in their own time, but you're basically speaking to a screen. So it's just a one-way kind of traffic. So usually in these type of interviews, you'll have up to 6 questions. And for each question, you may have 1 minute reading time, which is not recorded, and then you have 2 minutes to answer the question. So again, you need to do your practice, you need to do your presentation, you need to make sure your answers are concise and to the point. So you need to be ready for these. Usually you won't have an opportunity to retake or start the interview again. Luckily though, you should be able to do some practice questions on the site before you start. These won't be recorded and they won't be seen by the employer. So again, any practice you can do at all here, make sure you do it. So tips for video interviews. Look at the camera. Okay, so again, you need to get comfortable with the background, with the room that you're sitting in. Make sure it's quiet, that there's kind of, that you've got peace and quiet. There's no activity in the background. A plain wall if you can. I suppose the video itself, make sure you're looking at the camera and not at your photo. Do the practice questions, so make sure your camera's working, make sure your lighting is good, make sure that you can be understood, finish within the time, use the star structure to answer your questions. So quite a few of the questions on the video interviews as well will be competency-based questions. So you need to read the job description to find out what competencies that they're looking for and prepare your answers accordingly. You probably have questions as well, like why did you apply for this program? Why did you apply for this position? So again, a lot of it is about doing your research beforehand on the company. So use the star structure, use the STAR method to structure your answers, and don't forget to smile as well, because remember, somebody is going to be looking at this video. So again, remember, first impressions, you need to be professional, you need to be positive, and your energy needs to come through as well. Okay, to summarize, when you're preparing for an interview, you need to research the company. You need to read the job description thoroughly. You need to have examples ready for the interview. And remember, it's I and not we. To be properly prepared, I would actually suggest that you do write out your answers, first of all, using specific examples from college, from your work experience, from hobbies, from volunteering, from sports, anything. And you may need to write them out several times before you're happy with the answers. Use the STAR method to structure your answers. So remember, that's the situation or the task, the action, and the result. Then you need to practice your answers out loud. So you could do that with a friend, a family member, or a careers advisor. I think the more practice you do, the more confident you'll become. And don't memorize your answers, of course. Finally, I suppose, prepare your questions. So you're thinking of it as a conversation with a specific purpose. So, and you will be expected to ask 1 or 2 questions at the interview. So think carefully about the organisation of the job. If you've seen something about them in LinkedIn that you found interesting, you can ask them about that. I suppose the one thing not to ask about is, is the salary or the holidays or the benefits at this stage, really. But just think about what you'd like to know. If it's a graduate programme, for example, ask more about the graduate programme. Just make sure it's about the company, and usually have 1 or 2 questions, and make sure to finish on a positive note. So that's it on interviews for today, and thank you